the same questions again. What are the stories that are attached to being identified as a survivor? And what is that end time? When does it end? When do we stop being a survivor? So I sort of fell upon this survivor syndrome. I was looking up survivor and victim, and this was right next to it. And this, to me, made the point that survivor was still insufficient. And it said survivor syndrome, delayed symptoms, disintegration of personality, nightmares, tension, and guilt. Now, healing is a difficult process. And going through it, we're going to have these issues, and we're going to have this survivor syndrome like we saw Sheila was going through. But what I'm here talking to you about is the hindering of the healing process formed by our language and how that connects to this cycle of violence. So what I bring to you here is a theory by a gentleman named James Gilligan, and I found him a couple of years ago, and he's basically been studying the cycle of violence for 30 or 40 years. I actually brought his book here, and it's holding up the thing. But years ago, James Gilligan, he's a psychiatrist. He was invited to one of the highest security mental institute prisons in Massachusetts, and he was asked to come in and do some prison reform because there was a lot of violence happening between inmates. And as a psychiatrist, he came in and he said, okay, I'm going to use this as my lab. I'm going to notice what's going on and see if I can't make a shift here. And what he noticed is a linguistic thing, was he noticed that there was a lot of inmates saying, he dissed me. And what he made a connection with that was when someone takes a term and shortens it into slang, you find out how integral that is to their life process and their beliefs. So what he came up with was this theory of shame and death of self being a big cause of violence. Now, there's a gentleman that he quotes in his book, Herbert Thomas, from his book, Experiencing a Shame Response. The steps leading up to an act of violence as beginning with a rejection, which elicits intensely painful feelings of shame, to which the person responds with anger, which he then expresses or acts out with an act of violence. So basically, what the two of them are talking about here is one of the precursors to violence is shame. Now, looking at the terms victim and survivor and the story around them and how society views those words, there's a big shame connotation attached to those words. So the question becomes, how do we move past this cycle? So next I'm going to show you another clip. This is Jennifer Schuett. Her story is when she was 8 years old, she was kidnapped, tortured, and brutally sexually assaulted and pretty much left for dead. It's been 19 years since that, and they finally found the man who did this. And this was from her press release that she did recently.
This bit of my life 19 years ago was a tragic one. But today, 19 years later, I stand here and want you all to know that I'm okay. I'm not a victim, but instead victorious.
So what's really important here is, I don't know if everyone could hear it in the back, but she says, I am not a victim, but instead I am victorious. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in Mesereau's transformative learning model. And he outlines 4 steps to that: disorientation, self-reflection, action stage, and reintegration. The disorientation, obviously, here is the experiencing of sexual violence or sexual trauma. Then we have self-reflection. I have another quote here. Matthew you might giggle because this is another one of my professors. My professors really influenced me, and I love it. I just love everything that they bring into my life. But learners are encouraged to critically reflect on disorienting dilemmas and to make reasoned choices. So in the self-reflection, we're critically reflecting. We're taking a look at these labels and these identities, because in a disorientation, our identity is shifted. It is ripped from us sometimes. But what she's talking about here is to make reasoned choices, which in fact becomes this action stage. In Jennifer Schuett's case, she made a reasoned choice. I am no longer a victim, but instead I am victorious. And what we're talking about here is a reintegration. She has a new perspective. And another part of this clip that I didn't show here is she said that one thing that she wanted to come from her experience was to be able to use her voice to help other people. Now, to me, that's a complete new perspective on what she had been through, and that's exactly what she's doing. So we get to the meat here. Is there a better label? Now, I looked forever. I was looking for hours and hours and hours, and I couldn't find anything, and the closest I found was veteran. And to me, that denoted honor, it denoted experience, it denoted wisdom. But then there was a part of me that was like, wait a minute, there's this huge war and pain and conflict connotation attached to it. And that's when Rosenberg's nonviolent communication basically hit me over the head. I was like, wait a minute, it's not about creating a new label. Labels are the problem. And it's about using the nonviolent communication model. So in an interview Rosenberg did not too long ago when he was describing it, he said, you don't say, John, you were selfish. Now, when we label John as selfish, how does John get out of that identity of being selfish? When's the end point in that? Instead, we say, John, I notice you don't do a lot of things for other people, but you do a lot of things for yourself. We now give freedom for John to shift his identity and shift who he is by allowing that narrative to come in. So I'm closing now, and basically, there's one reason why I'm doing this presentation with you here today, and it was when I found this statistic. 33% of juvenile delinquents and 76% of serial rapists were sexually abused as children. This was in a study conducted by the University of Pennsylvania, and this was about the same time that I found James Gilligan. And this statistic told me one thing. We are not dealing with the issue. We are not fully healing, we are not fully reintegrating this issue of sexual violence if there's such a high occurrence of people who have experienced it going out and perpetrating the same crime. And as academics in the field, and especially anthropology and language and linguistics, we need to take responsibility, and we need to be linguistically mindful of the choice of words that we use and whether or not we are inhibiting someone's personal narrative and whether or not we are supporting them in healing. And I'm not saying that this is going to change everything and fix it right off the dot, but we go back to Amy Mullins and what she said. This is a step we take because our language affects our thinking, which then in turn can affect our behaviors and can help produce our results. So thank you very much.